And I do want to get right back into it here at this hour as troops from several European countries, that includes France, Germany, the UK, Norway, and Sweden, arriving in Greenland in a show of support for Denmark as talks between representatives of Denmark, Greenland, and the U.S. on Wednesday highlighted, quote, fundamental disagreement, end quote, between the Trump administration and European allies on Greenland's future. Denmark announced that it would increase its military presence in Greenland, and several European partners started sending symbolic numbers of troops there on Wednesday. The troop movements were intended to portray unity among Europeans and send a signal to President Trump that an American takeover of Greenland is not necessary, as NATO together can safeguard the security of Greenland amid rising Russian and Chinese interest. There is so much to this, so I do want to bring in Ron Dole, professor of history at Florida State University, to talk much more about all of this. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to be here this morning.
It's good to be with you.
All right, so I do want to get right into it here and talk about any sort of maybe historical precedent that does exist for a potential U.S. takeover of Greenland.
The U.S. has long been very interested in Greenland. The first attempt to purchase Greenland, to acquire it, came after the U.S. Civil War. After the purchase of Alaska, there were other attempts in the beginning of the 20th century, but the real interest that the U.S. had in Greenland grew during World War II and then during the Cold War. The idea of acquiring Greenland back then, throughout the Cold War, was one of negotiation, of working with Danish authorities. The U.S. had been given permission to operate in Greenland once Germany had taken over Denmark at the beginning of World War II in 1940. And the agreement was that the U.S. could continue to operate in Greenland until the situation resolved itself and there was a larger peace that would allow the resumption of earlier agreements. And we are decades after that point, and that larger agreement and subsequent ones still hold.
Looking into all of this a little bit deeper, the big question that a lot of people have asked is, why does the U.S. want Greenland in the first place? What can you kind of break down for folks out there?
There's a long issue involving national security. Back when aircraft couldn't go entirely across the Atlantic Ocean, routes that went through Greenland in the center between the North American and the Eurasian continent made Greenland particularly strategic. Indeed, just after World War II, one of the ways Greenland was referred to as the world's largest stationary aircraft carrier. But there were also interests in using Greenland to monitor signals from the Soviet Union, as after 1947, the Soviet Union became the center of the emerging Cold War. That is on the national security side. Greenland became, of course, the home to the Thule Air Force Base in the far northwest corner of Greenland, one of the largest air bases ever built. But there were also some minerals that were important. Cryolite mining in the southern tip of Greenland was really important for aluminum manufacturing. Think back to aircraft, World War II. Greenland served both of those realms.
What sort of limitations exist? And we kind of went into this a little bit, but limitations for the U.S. or really anyone to acquire a location like Greenland when you talk about international law and things of that nature?
The long enduring system that was created after World War II, the Western security system, if you will, had as a framework the sovereignty of nations, the independence, the ability of people to make choices within their own nations. And the threat of force has long been seen as a violation of that Western alliance. Think of the war that emerged between Russia and Ukraine. That was an attempt to take a territory from another sovereign nation.
What do we need to be watching for next as all of this does progress, move forward? Of course, we know that President Trump met with officials just yesterday. There's a lot of discussion. Now we have these European troops from several different countries that are there in Greenland to show their support, so to speak. So what do we need to be watching for?
I think, among other things, we need to see how the people of Greenland and Denmark feel about this shift in attitude towards United States and United States policy. I think back to when the United States was operating in the early decades of the Cold War in Greenland, first building the Thule Air Force Base and then building Camp Century, a nuclear powered city under the ice more than 100 miles further east in the ice cap, in part as a way of demonstrating cooperation between Denmark and the United States. Denmark, of course, along with the United States, one of the founding members of NATO. There was a lot of trust that existed at that point. Danish people had adopted a policy of no nukes in their state and the larger territory. The leaders recognized the United States did intend and brought in nuclear weapons to store and for flights that originated from Thule, but allowed that, found ways of maintaining cooperation with the United States. That trust has been eroded at present.
Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and helping to break it down. There's so much to it, a lot of historical context, so we definitely appreciate it. Anything we missed that you want to make sure that we highlight before I let you go?
It is rare that a story unfolds so quickly that we have to really check the news feeds an hour before we begin on a historic topic. But we're there now.
That is a fair statement there. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We definitely appreciate it.
My thanks.